everybody. Welcome to our second video lecture for Vet Tissue 413. So for this video lecture, we will be discussing the hypothalamus, the pituitary glands, and their associated hormones and other axes that are rather in control of the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So of course, first we need to discuss what is the hypothalamus. So as you can see here, it is found in the central nervous system. Basically, it receives information from the environment or from other parts of the body, and it contains nuclei. So these nuclei are bundles of neurons that are endocrine in function. So what do they control? So they control body temperature, your appetite, sexual behavior, anger, rage, biological rhythms, and the autonomic nervous system. So sa madaling sabi, when you actually look at it at a wider range, the hypothalamus, it is where the nervous system and the endocrine system meet. Because again, there are a lot of nuclei. Nuclei are bundles of neurons that release neuroendocrine compounds that affect hormone release or inhibit the release of hormones from the pituitary gland. So primarily what the hypothalamus are releasing and inhibiting hormones that affect cells, specific types of cells in the pituitary gland. So just as an overview, these are examples of controlling hormones or mga releasing and inhibiting hormones secreted by the hypothalamus that have specific effects on specific types of cells in the pituitary gland. So for example, for growth hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone and growth hormone inhibiting hormone. Of course, for the function, for the GHRH, of course, release of growth hormone. For the GHIH or your somatostatin, of course, it is to inhibit growth hormone secretion. So the name already gives the function of the hormone. So a lot of you also have those that affect prolactin, but do take note, medyo hypothetical lang siya as of the moment because the prolactin inhibiting hormone is actually dopamine. So do take note of that. But it has basically the point is it has inhibiting and releasing hormones for prolactin, only releasing hormones for thyrotropin or for thyroid hormones, corticotropin, those that affect hormones that are released by your adrenal glands, adrenal cortex to be specific, and your gonadotropins that influences the effects of gonadotrophic hormones such as your LH and your FSH. So now, let's go to the second part of the hypothalamo-hypophyseal axis. So let's now talk about the hypophyseal part or the hypophysis, which is just another term for your pituitary gland. So it is found again just below your hypothalamus. So this is your hypothalamus and this is your pituitary gland. It is connected by the pituitary stalk or the infundibulum. So it produces numerous hormones and regulate other endocrine glands. So as you may imply in the table, in the previous table shown. So they produce trophic hormones. So when compared to, say, the hypothalamic hormones which are releasing and inhibiting hormones, these are trophic hormones. So they have effect on specific types of body organs or body cells throughout the body. I hope that's understandable to you. So generally, your pituitary gland has two different parts, anatomically and functionally. You have your adenohypophysis, which is your anterior pituitary. It has endocrine cells that release hormones in the hypophyseal portal system. So it is a system of blood vessels that connect the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. Then we also have your neurohypophysis or your posterior pituitary gland, which is neuroregulated because it is stimulated directly by the nerve endings of the said nuclei. So mga bundles of neurons, which primarily are your supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei from the hypothalamus. So again, these are just a summary of the pituitary hormones, hormones na nire-release na pituitary gland. So of course, in response to your growth hormone releasing hormone or your GHRH from the hypothalamus, growth hormone is secreted by the somatotrope, a type of cell in the adenohypophysis. So of course, nare-release yun. So in the similar fashion, of course, you have also for prolactin, thyroid-stimulating hormone simulates the secretion, synthesis and secretion of thyroid glands. Yung FSH and LH natin kanina, that is stimulated by the GnRH, gonadotropins releasing hormones, your adrenocorticotropic hormone, then your beta endorphins. So beta endorphins is actually a bit medyo add one out siya dito because technically it's not an important endocrine hormone, but it is released by the pars intermedia, as we will discuss later on. Now let's go to the first part of your pituitary gland. So of course, it is your adenohypophysis or your anterior pituitary gland. So the adenohypophysis contains endocrine cells that are activated by the yung inhibiting at saka mga releasing hormones secreted by the hypothalamus. And more important, and also these cells, they release hormones through the hypophyseal portal system. So this is the hypophyseal portal system. So as we previously mentioned, the regulatory hormones, the releasing and the inhibitory hormones released by the hypothalamus is secreted in this hypophyseal portal system, and they are able to reach their target cells in the adenohypophysis through this network of blood vessels. And also, hormones that are secreted by the cells of the adenohypophysis exit the pituitary gland and reach their targets towards in the other parts of the body through this portal system, and it circulates in the blood to reach its targets on the body. So it is anatomically and functionally divided into three parts. You have your pars distalis, pars intermedia, and your pars tuberalis. So for our purpose here, what is important to us in endocrinology is actually pars distalis and pars intermedia. So in pars distalis, it releases your thyroid-stimulating hormone, your prolactin, your growth hormone, your luteinizing hormone, your follicular-stimulating hormone, and your adrenocorticotropic hormones. So the cells that release these hormones are your thyrotropes, your lactotropes for prolactin, somatotropes for growth hormone or somatotropin, gonadotropes for your LH and your FSH, and of course corticotropes for your adrenocorticotropic hormones. So for pars intermediate, this is somewhat less important, but what the important hormone here is the melanocyte stimulating hormone. So of course, intermediate is in between. So histologically, this is the picture of your adenohypophysis. So this is your neurohypophysis already. This is the pituitary glands, and of course, in between, you can find your pars intermedia. Now, for the second part of your pituitary gland, which is your neurohypophysis, it is stimulated by the axons of the supraoptic and the paraventricular nuclei, as you can see here. So compared to the adenohypophysis, which receives its signal, or the releasing and the inhibiting hormone from the hypothalamus via the hypophyseal portal system, the neurohypophysis, kaya nga siya neuro, it receives the signal or the stimulation rather from the direct from the nuclei that are found in the hypothalamus, primarily your SO and your PV nuclei, your supraoptic or paraventricular nuclei. So you anatomically, it also has two parts: your infundibulum, the one that connects the pituitary gland from the to the hypothalamus rather, and of course your pars nervosa, yung pinakita natin kanina, which is the secretory part. So there are generally two hormones that are released by your neurohypophysis, which is your oxytocin and your vasopressin. So we'll go through them one by one later on. So just to emphasize the difference between the regulation of the release of hormones from the anterior pituitary to anterior and your posterior pituitary, here is a diagram, so I will be explaining it to you. So as previously mentioned, the releasing and inhibiting hormone released by the hypothalamus, so dito yung hypothalamus, that affects the anterior pituitary, it has to go through the hypophyseal portal system. So these nuclei, again, these are bundles of nerves that are able nagre-release ng mga releasing and inhibiting hormones. They release such hormones in this portal system. It is a portal system because it is a closed system that basically yung mga nare-release na hormone dito from the hypophyseal part or your sa hypothalamus na part, it reaches the anterior pituitary via this system of blood vessels, so hypophyseal portal system. In contrast, your posterior pituitary, as you can see here, walang portal system involved here. Basically, what happens is that your posterior pituitary is stimulated directly by the axons, as previously mentioned, the axons or the tails of the nuclei. So you again yung bundles of nucleus, that the secretory nerves that are found in your hypothalamus. So they release these, they are stimulated. The cells here in your pars nervosa or your neurohypophysis is stimulated directly neurally by the axons of the supraoptic or paraventricular nucleus or nuclei rather. So again, of course, for the hormones that are secreted by both the adeno and neurohypophysis to affect their specific target cells throughout the body, they must be carried away by the venous drainage for the hormones to find themselves in the circulation and find their target cells or target organs throughout the body. So just an example of how the hypothalamo-hypophyseal axis work, let's look at the growth hormone or somatotropin. So when there is a need for growth, for example, mga growing animals, the young ones, once stimulated, the hypothalamus secretes the growth hormone releasing hormone or your GHRH. And this GHRH are secreted by the secretory nuclei in the hypothalamus through the hypophyseal portal system. Again, it is the system of blood vessels that are found and connects the hypothalamus to the adenohypophysis or your anterior pituitary. So it releases the GHRH. The hypothalamus releases the GHRH in the hypophyseal portal system, and of course, blood flow will enable the GHRH to found the somatotropes. These are the specific cell targets of GHRH to release somatotropin. Ito, your growth hormone. Yan na siya. So this is just an example of how the hypophyseal portal system works in linking the connection between the hypothalamus and the adenohypophysis. In contrast, we have here an example of a hormone that is secreted by your posterior pituitary or your neurohypophysis, which is your oxytocin. So as you can see here, your paraventricular and supraoptic nerve nucleus directly sends the message via their axons to the posterior pituitary. So dito tayo sa likod, posterior pituitary, wherein oxytocin is secreted, synthesized and secreted, and released into the bloodstream to find its way primarily on the mammary gland or in the female reproductive system. So again, In contrast to the growth hormone that was previously shown in the other slide, it does not oxytocin, much like antidiuretic hormone, also yung kasama niya na nare-release ng neurohypophysis, does not actually need the hypophyseal portal system, because cells that secrete them in the pars nervosa or on the neurohypophysis is directly stimulated by the axons of the nuclei that are found in the hypothalamus. So primarily your PO and your SO or your P and PV nuclei. Now, let's go one by one to the hormones that are released by your adenohypophysis. So first, we have your somatotropin or your growth hormone. So as previously mentioned, it's produced by somatotropes in your adenohypophysis, and its release and secretion is actually promoted by the growth hormone releasing hormone, and its inhibition is stimulated by the somatotropin releasing inhibiting factor, or your pwede rin siyang GHIH or your growth hormone inhibiting hormones. So in generally, or mas madaling sabihin rather, the inhibiting factor could be aptly named as your somatostatin, which both of these factors, the releasing and inhibiting factors, are from your hypothalamus. Again, they travel via the hypophyseal portal system. So what's the general function of growth hormone? Of course, it increases lipolysis, so breakdown of fat, glycogenolysis or breakdown of glycogen. So of course, the overall goal of this lipolysis and glycogenolysis is to break down energy sources, your lipids and your glycogen, um, para mag-increase yung available energy sources for growth. Next, you have your protein accretion. So basically, the goal of protein accretion, protein synthesis or protein absorption, is increasing the protein reserves of the body for growth. And chondrogenesis, it enables chondrogenesis in bones, of course, for the lengthening of long bones and other types of bones. So in the liver, it actually stimulates the release of somatomidins, your somatomidin C and somatomidin A. So primarily, what is more important is your somatomidin C, which is also known as your insulin-like growth factor 1. So it acts like insulin. So insulin, the main goal of insulin is to enable the entrance of glucose into your cells. So of course, when glucose is allowed to enter the cells, they may be used for other purposes, and for the purpose of growth hormone, of course, it will be used for growth. So the previously mentioned somatomidin A or your IGF-2 is similar to IGF-1, but it is paracrine in action, so it just acts on cells that are nearby. So what are the how is the secretion of growth hormones regulated? So in the hypothalamus, when the hypothalamus senses hypoglycemia, or they are low blood sugar, lactation, fasting, or exercise, when these four are sensed by your hypothalamus, GHRH is released. So your growth hormone releasing hormone is released through the hypophyseal portal system. It finds its way to these somatotropes, which will release your GH. So as previously mentioned, diba, the main function of growth hormone is of course growth. So it achieves this through lipolysis, glycogenolysis, protein accretion, and chondrogenesis. And also in the liver, it releases your IGF-1, which, as previously mentioned, also has an effect similar to insulin. So what the end product of which are, for adipose, so increased lipolysis, so breakdown of lipids or breakdown of fat. For bones, again, yung chondrogenesis natin, so it lengthen the lengthening or the growth of your bone tissues. And for muscle, of course, protein accretion more muscle is growing because protein synthesis is increased, and there are a lot more kumbaga protein molecules or amino acids primarily that can be used to build up muscles because of protein accretion. So basically, and the end goal, as the name of the hormone implies, is of course growth. Again, action. For the specifics of its actions, of course, it has an acute catabolic action. Again, lipolysis and glycogenolysis are catabolic because breakdown, it is a breakdown reaction. So you're breaking down lipids, you're breaking down glycogen, basically energy sources, para may energy yung katawan ng animal or katawan ng tao to grow, to enable the function of the growth hormone. It also has slow anabolic effects, which is via its IGFs. So IGF-1 and IGF-2. So as previously mentioned, of course, your growth hormone has an effect on your bone and cartilage, internal organs, your protein metabolism, carbohydrate metabolism, and lipid metabolism. So let's start here sa baba. As previously mentioned, lipolysis and glycogenolysis. So end goal is to increase the energy sources that are available for growth. So of course, you decrease the synthesis of fatty acids, and you decrease the synthesis of fatty acids, and you increase lipolysis. So you break down these fatty acids rather, for them to become glucose that are easily available for energy use. On the same manner, carbohydrate metabolism is increased due to glycogenolysis, the glycogenolytic effect of growth hormones. Again, end goal is maraming available energy for growth. Protein metabolism is protein accretion rather is the main goal here. So of course, increase uptake of amino acid from the blood and increase synthesis of new proteins to enable muscle growth and other functions that require high protein in their process. So for internal organs, yeah, there are here. And of course, for your bone and cartilages, of course, growth of your bone or basically long bone. So in cases that are sa mga animals na deficient of growth hormones for some reason, for some pathologic reason, dwarfism is the result when growth hormone secretion is deficient in the animal. Pag nasobrahan naman, it's gigantism. And a form of gigantism actually is acromegaly, na excess na siya ng growth hormones in adults. In adults na close na yung physis nila, yung kumbaga the growth of the bones cannot be done already kasi nag-close na yung physis nila. So for example here of your pituitary dwarfism, one of the dog breeds that are most commonly affected by this condition are your German Shepherd. So for example here, we have a 6-month-old German Shepherd. I think you know by now, but dapat a German Shepherd by the 6th month, napakalaki na nito. Almost the same na or more, even bigger than a normal size na mga, say, Aspin. But if you can see here, napakaliit niya. Very, very small features. So what, aside from that, what are the specifics na nakikita natin most commonly in the animals that have pituitary dwarfism? So of course, the most prominent that you can see here as seen in the example is those that affect your musculoskeletal system. So of course, number one, stunted ang growth, because growth hormone, again, the main function is growth. So if it is deficient, the animal will not grow to its full potential. So it has thin skin, changes in the ossification centers, delayed closure of growth plates, delayed dental eruption, fox-like facial features as shown here, very pointed ang muscle, and muscle atrophy, very, very small ang muscles, because again, protein accretion is not sufficient because of the not sufficient stimulation of the growth hormone. So dermatological features, also there's a problem there. Reproductive system, other manifestations, and of course, most modern findings ito mo nakikita, mostly it could probably be due to mga pituitary cysts, atrophy of the adenohypophysis, and mga cancers or mga hypoplasia in the thyroid gland. An example naman on the other end of the spectrum, kung kanina dwarfism, ngayon we have our acromegaly. So feline, an example here is a feline acromegaly. So if you can see here, the facial features is very odd. Again, it affects, acromegaly affects mga adults na wherein yung desired growth of the excess growth hormone cannot be accommodated because the physis of their bones has already closed. So the growth here, the facial feature is very odd rather because of the weird conformation of the skull due to acromegaly. So most commonly reported cases have these clinical features. So PUPD, so your polyuria polydipsia, very common with regards to endocrine conditions. There's always your PUPD, your polyuria and polydipsia. So weight gain, leanness, CNS problems, increase in paw size, again because increased growth due to excess in growth hormone, broad facial features as shown here, very odd facial features, abdominal enlargement, and plantigrade stance. So hind lean, mga other problems there. So one weird occurrence or pathology of this is that the myocardium, again the muscle tissue or the cardiac muscles of the heart, is very becomes thickened, or there's generalized hypertrophy. Again, this is due to increase in excess growth hormones, and again because a function of growth hormone is protein accretion. So hypertrophy of muscular tissues, as shown at, for example here, of the myocardium, is inevitable in such cases. So next, we have your prolactin. So of course, it is produced by your lactotropes or mammotropes in the pars distalis of your adenohypophysis. Now, for its regulation, it is not as straightforward as that of growth hormone na may releasing hormone and may inhibiting hormone. If you can remember on the slide na may summary ng hypothalamic hormones, yung prolactin part doon ay nakalagay na theoretical or hypothetical only because sa iba't ibang species, may iba't ibang role or may iba't ibang hormones, iba't ibang functions that actually regulate the secretion and inhibition of secretion of your prolactin. So in general, it is accepted that there is a prolactin releasing hormone, and of course the role of that is of course to release the release of the prolactin. So this is secreted by your hypothalamus. So in birds, it is said to be your vasoactive intestinal peptide. Now, in mammals naman, our references say that yung release niya is spontaneous and at baseline level. So what that means is that prolactin is just continuously released. And yung dopamine, ito, so nakita niyo naman, diba, dopamine would just stop it when the concentration is already too much, so negative feedback lang siya. However, there are speculations that there is also the existence of the prolactin inhibiting factor. But as of now, the antagonist of the secretion of prolactin is understood to be dopamine. So with regards to function, of course, it has an indispensable role in lactation. Lactin nga, di ba? So, indispensable role in lactation and maintains milk production, especially those in milking lambs. However, in other species naman, other groups of animals, it has a lot of roles too. So it is involved in the metamorphosis of amphibians, the secretion of crop milk sa pigeons, maintenance of parental behaviors in a lot of animals, maintenance of your corpus luteum in rats. So it's the ang other name ng prolactin sa rats is your lutetropic hormone because it maintains their corpus luteum, and it is also important in the secretion of testosterone in male rats. So as previously mentioned, medyo confusing or medyo dodgy ang secretory inhibitor and inhibitory regulation of prolactin. So in birds, it is said to be your vasoactive intestinal protein. In mammals naman, it's said na parturition and lactation, primarily the suckling of the teats of the dam. There is a neuroendocrine reflex na nag-i-inhibit sa dopamine. So, if you inhibit dopamine, and as previously mentioned, di ba, sa mammals, prolactin is continuously released at baseline level. So, prolactin will be continuously secreted. In birds naman, the lactotrophs is osmosensitive. So, changes in osmotic pressure sa katawan ng fish would increase the secretion of prolactin. So, as we use in here, lactotrophs are osmosensitive. These are for example, these are the secretagogue or the secretory stimuli that would allow increased secretion of prolactin. So, again, sa birds, it's your VIP. So, vasoactive intestinal protein. Sa mammals naman, it's said to be that suckling is it inhibits the secretion of DOPA and thus allowing the continuous release of your prolactin at baseline level, so prolactin can have its effect. And in fish, it is said to be due to osmoregulation or osmosensitive lactotrophs in your adenohypophysis. So, as previously mentioned, the function of prolactin has an indispensable function in the milk secretion or sa pag-aano ng milk. However, there are other functions that it helps in. So of course, again, ito na yung mammary development and lactation with regards to reproduction. It also aids in growth and development. It also has a role in water and electrolyte balance, integument structures, in maintaining integument structures, primarily yung mammary gland, and it has actions on steroid-dependent targets or synergisms with other steroid hormones. So please do take note and do read on these specific functions. So next, we will discuss your thyroid hormones. So these are the parathyroid glands as shown here, your anterior esophagus, near your larynx. Through the stimulation of the hypothalamo-pituitary axis. So again, it is part of the thyroid it is part of your hormones that are regulated by your pituitary gland. So microscopically, this is a microscopic picture of your thyroid gland. So it is composed of your thyroid follicles. So these structures, this entire structure, your thyroglobulin colloids. So itong may blue, may orange colored structures. These are colloids which are actually they store your thyroid hormones, your thyroid follicular cells, and your parafollicular cells or C cells that secrete your calcitonin. So as previously mentioned, your thyroid hormones, primarily your T3 and T4, are actually stored here in your thyroglobulin colloid. And when follicular epithelial cells, those cells lining the thyroid follicles, are stimulated by your thyrotropin or thyroid stimulating hormone, they harvest the T3 and T4 from these colloids, synthesize it, package it, and secrete it to the bloodstream for them to enact their function. So regulatory-wise, when the hypothalamus senses a cold environment or when the dam is in lactation, so the hypothalamus would synthesize and secrete your thyrotropin-releasing hormone or your TRH. So this TRH finds its way again into the hypothalamoportal system. It finds its way to the adenohypophysis and finds the thyrotropes. So the cells that secrete your thyroid-stimulating hormone or your thyrotropin. So this thyrotropin or TSH finds its way through the circulation to the thyroid gland and again stimulates the the follicular cells, the follicular epithelial cells to be specific, to harvest the T3 and T4 from the thyroglobulin colloid, get the T3 and T4 and release it to the circulation where it can find its target cells primarily throughout the body. So the effect in general of T3 and T4, it has a special role in your nervous system, maturation of your nervous system, bone maturation. Right? Again, it is one of the hormones that work in concert with your growth hormone. Then regulation of puberty, again, with regards to growth. And of course, the main function is increased metabolic rate. Now let's go to their specific thyroid hormones, your T3 and T4. So your T3 is triiodothyronine and your thyroxine is your T4. So technically, both are biologically active. So when we say biologically active, both actually exert their effect on cells. However, within mammalian plasma, higher concentrations of T4 are actually found. However, with regards to the ones in intracellular receptors, primarily in your nucleus, um, it has higher affinity to T3. So sometimes yung T4 ninyo, pagpasok sa cells, it's actually converted to T3 to have a higher chance of binding to thyroid receptors in the nucleus. So, there's no diurnal rhythm sa secretion, so it's not na sinisecrete lang siya pag umaga or it's not that sinisecrete lang siya pag gabi. So, it's continuously secreted at baseline and negative feedback lang siya when it, of course, when it is too much. Negative feedback at the pituitary level to maintain enough concentrations in the blood. So, what's the function of your thyroid hormones? Again, the main goal, the main function here is to increase metabolic rate or increase the basal metabolic rate. So, what does that mean? So, it basically increases the cellular activity and cellular functions of your cell. So, in general, it actually, again, as previously mentioned, it works in concert with your growth hormone for growth and development and the maturation of a lot of your organ systems, to be specific, your nervous and others. An important note lang here is that for your nervous system, it's important because it increases or enables the normal nerve conduction velocities. Of course, the speed at which information is transmitted to your nerves actually has an effect. The thyroid hormone has an effect to it, and skin integrity, as you will see later, very evident when an animal has thyroid function pathology. It's very evident sa skin pa lang. So in those that suffer hypothyroidism, very evident here that there is hair loss. So again, maintenance of the dermatologic aspects of the effect of thyroid hormones is not maintained kasi nga there is deficiency in thyroid hormone secretion. So again, a big factor here is metabolically, the animal is lethargic. They gain weight because the metabolism is low, exercise intolerant, and cold intolerant. Kasi nga, again, when metabolism is increased or when metabolism is maintained, the end product should be thermoregulation or mainit. Maiinitan kapag nalalamigan ka, dapat mainitan ka, or you will go back to your thermoneutral temperature. But again, since hypothyroidism, deficient ang thyroid hormone, so the animal is not able to return back to its thermoneutral temperature. Again, as I previously mentioned, the first thing that you will see in animals with thyroid problem actually is the dermatological problem. So poor quality of yung mga hair coat, endocrine alopecia. Alopecia is lack of hair. Mga rat tail, as seen here, at mga patsi-patsi ng mga alopecic area o mga area na walang buhok. So there are also neurological aspects, again, special function on your nervous system, maturation and maintenance, cardiovascular, reproductive, and other pathologies that are caused by deficient thyroid function. Dito naman tayo sa hyperthyroidism. So there's excess of thyroid hormone. So what you can see here is weight loss. So in contrast kanina, wherein the metabolic rate is low because there is deficient thyroid hormone. So weight gain is seen here in those that have excess thyroid hormone. So thyroid function is also exacerbated. So weight loss is the effect. Polyphagia, tachycardia, mga systolic murmurs, again PUPD, hyperactivity, irritability, and other functions. So goiter could be a reason here. And as you can see here, again, not much of alopecia, not much of endocrine alopecia, but rather still very bad condition of their coat, which is very evident for those that have hyperthyroidism. So next, punta tayo dun sa magkatabi lang na hormone, katabi lang na organ. So you have your parathyroid hormone, or your thyroid calcitonin. So these two actually play a role in calcium hemostasis. So maintaining the proper concentration of calcium in the body. So your parathyroid hormone is secreted actually by parathyroid glands, so as you can see here anatomically, in response to hypocalcemia. So when there is low calcium blood level. So it is secreted by your parathyroid cells or mga chief cells, which actually is able to sense hypocalcemia. And the main goal is of course to increase the blood calcium concentration. Your thyroid calcitonin naman, as previously mentioned, is actually secreted by the parafollicular cells of your thyroid glands. So, take note, PTH lang ang sinisecrete ng parathyroid gland. The thyroid calcitonin, as the name implies, is secreted by your C cells or parafollicular cells, ito, in the thyroid glands. So, in contrast, ang goal na naman is to decrease blood calcium concentration. So, the main importance here of your parathyroid gland is that, again, to bring, kung mababa ang calcium concentration, such is the case in your hypocalcemic animal, the goal is to increase the calcium concentration. So, how does the body do this? Through the action of your parathyroid glands. So, it affects in your bones. So, it acts on osteoclasts, so mga cells in your that is able to break down your bone tissue to release calcium and phosphate. Sa kidney naman, so it reduces calcium clearance and it enables the vitamin D activation. In your intestine naman, of course, it's activated yung vitamin D absorption natin, and vitamin D, through the vitamin D rather, the absorption of calcium is hastened. So the synergistic actions of these three main functions actually help in increasing the calcium levels in the blood to combat the hypocalcemia, which triggered the release of your parathyroid hormone. So na-mention yung vitamin D kanina. So how does it play a role together with your parathyroid hormone? So in kidneys, yung parathyroid hormone actually activates the enzyme that converts your 25-hydroxy vitamin D, yung inactive form niya, into 1,25-dihydroxy vitamin D, which is the active form. This 1,25-dihydroxy vitamin D has an effect on your GI tract. Primarily, it increases the absorption of calcium in the gut. Now, this is very important in animals that does not have the ability to convert inactive vitamin D to active vitamin D through their skin, primarily the dogs and the cat. So, in concert with the parathyroid hormones, and through the effect of parathyroid hormones actually, vitamin D plays a role in your calcium homeostasis. Now, let's go to your adrenocortical hormones or hormones that are secreted by your adrenal cortex, which is actually also under the regulation of your pituitary gland. So your adrenal cortex, as you can see here, is actually functionally and anatomically divided into three parts again. So your zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata, and your zona reticularis. So your zona glomerulosa actually is involved in secreting the hormones that are regulate the mineral balance of your body. So your mineralocorticoids, so primarily your aldosterone. So your zona fasciculata is actually involved in secreting your glucocorticoids, which is your, regulate your glucose metabolism, which is your stress hormone. So your cortisol, cortisone, and your corticosterone. Your zona reticularis naman is um, releases your adrenocortical androgens. So simulate masculinization. So we will go through them one by one. So before we move to the specific hormones, as previously mentioned, again, your hypothalamus, for example here, your cortisol or stress hormone, your glucocorticoids. For example here, when stress is sensed by your hypothalamus, it secretes your corticotropin releasing hormone, which acts on your corticotropes again through your hypophyseal portal system. It finds the corticotropes in your anterior pituitary adenohypophysis, and it stimulates your corticotropes to release the adenocorticotropic hormone. This is secreted into the finds its way to the circulation, and of course acts on the adrenocortical cells. So cells of the adrenal cortex, rather primarily those that are found in your zona fasciculata. Again, endpoint is to release cortisol and to combat stress, because cortisol is your primary stress hormone. So now, let's discuss your mineralocorticoids. So the primary mineralocorticoid in the mammalian body is the aldosterone. So of course, it is secreted by the cells in your zona glomerulosa. So it is involved in the regulation and the metabolism of your sodium, potassium, and chloride ions. So it is actually part of the system that maintains blood pressure and blood volume in mammalian system. So it is the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. So how does this system work? So when there is a drop in blood pressure or a drop in blood volume, so mababa ang blood pressure at saka mababa yung blood volume, renin is released from your kidney. So this renin will act on your angiotensinogen, which is a precursor to your angiotensin rather. So your renin will act on angiotensinogen to form angiotensin 1. Now, there are angiotensin converting enzymes in your lungs that would convert this angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Now, it is this angiotensin 2 that stimulates the release of aldosterone from your adrenal cortex. So, si aldosterone will act on the kidneys, primarily on the distal tubules and the nephron rather, to stimulate the reabsorption of sodium, chloride, and potassium, and of course water, because where sodium goes, water goes. So the end goal of that is actually to increase blood volume, because you are pulling water. So again, where sodium goes, water goes. So you're pulling water from the urine to bring back the volume of blood, and of course when mataas na yung volume ng blood, the blood pressure would also elevate to normalize it. So again, aldosterone is part of the system that maintains blood pressure and blood volume, which is your renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. So next is your glucocorticoids. So these are secreted again by your cells that are found in zona fasciculata. So the primary stress hormone is your cortisol. So it's the primary glucocorticoid produced by most mammals. So cortisone is also a glucocorticoid, but is primarily in amphibians, reptiles, birds, and rodents. So these are stress hormones. So they increase blood glucose. Together with the function of decreasing blood glucose, they also suppress the immune response. So they inhibit prostaglandin formation, they decrease function of phagocytic cells, so mga neutrophils and macrophages ninyo, excuse me, and they suppress antibody formation. So there's a suppression of immune response and hence anti-inflammatory response. And they also suppress your vasopressin or antidiuretic hormone, resulting to again your PUPD or polyuria polydipsia. So when stress, as previously mentioned, your cortisol are stress hormones. So when stress is sensed by your hypothalamus, your ACT adrenocorticotropic hormone releasing hormone ACTH-RH is released by your hypothalamus again through the hypophyseal portal system to find corticotropes in the adenohypophysis. So once stimulated, these corticotropes will release your adrenocorticotropic hormone, and this adrenocorticotropic hormone is released to the circulation and of course to find its way in the adrenal cortex cells in the zona fasciculata to increase or to secrete rather cortisol. So what's the effect? So in all cells, decreased tissue growth, increased lipolysis in adipose tissue again to increase blood glucose, decreased insulin sensitivity because insulin enables glucose to enter the cell, but the goal of cortisol is to increase blood glucose, so dapat hindi makapasok sa cell. So anti-insulin effect. Increased gluconeogenesis, so increase the synthesis of glucose from other sources such as fat, proteins, and others. To increase, again, the goal is increase blood glucose, and anti-inflammatory and immunosuppressive effect as previously specified. So there is actually two diseases similar to thyroidism. You also have your hypo and your hyper. So hypoadrenocorticism is actually your Addison's disease. So what you see usually in hypoadrenocorticism in dogs is that they have inappetent, they are lethargic, they are weak, they may be vomiting, there is diarrhea, weight loss, shivering, again PUPD, polyuria polydipsia, and there's depression, weakness, dehydration, inappropriately slow heart rate, and hypothermia. They are primarily sluggish, and much like other endocrine problems, there's also problem with regards to their coat and their body condition. In contrast naman, your hyperadrenocorticism is actually otherwise known as your Cushing's disease. There are specific signs to it. So, similar to other endocrine problems, again, PUPD is seen. And in this particular case, there is pot-bellied effect in dogs. So, as you see here, there's abdominal distension. Liver enlargement could also be seen due to increased, again, overstimulation of gluconeogenesis and other functions. Muscle wasting because a muscle is being eaten to produce more glucose through gluconeogenesis. Skin changes, as you see here, alopecia, patsi-patsi ng walang buhok, persistent anestrus, calcinosis cutis, there is parang nagka-calcify na yung mga skin niya, myotonia, neurologic signs, hypertensive retinopathy, and very, very basically dermatologically there is a problem hyper with cats that are hyperadrenocortical. As you've seen here, there's a non-healing wound because the skin is not maintained due to hyperadrenocorticism. So as previously mentioned, your adrenal cortex also release adrenal androgens. So these are released by your zona reticularis. So there's primarily two. You have your dihydroepiandrosterone or an androstenedione. So these are analog or precursors of testosterone because these may actually be converted to testosterone. However, they themselves may interact with sex hormone receptors. And in females, these androgens may actually be converted to estrogen. And they are primarily of importance in humans and other primates. Let's move on to your adenohypophysis gonadotropin sex steroid axis. So basically, these are sex hormones, mga stimulating hormones secreted by your adenohypophysis which actually acts on your reproductive system. So primarily, you have two, your FSH and your LH. So your follicle stimulating hormone, as the name implies, of course, stimulates follicular development in females, so ovarian follicular development in females as shown here. So they also simulate the secretion of estrogen from the follicular cells, and in male, um, they induce sperm production in the seminiferous tubules. Whereas your LH naman, luteinizing hormone, in most species of animals, most mammals actually, they induce ovulation. And at the same time, they do luteinization. So yung follicle wherein the egg has already ovulated, it changes its appearance and its function to become progesterone secreting cells. So yun yung luteinization, which actually becomes your corpus luteum. So basically, it helps, or it stimulates the conversion of the ovulated follicle to the corpus luteum, which is a specific type of structure that produces progesterone. So in males, it induces the production of course, the main male androgen, that your testosterone in your cells of Leydig. So as you see here in the graph, a small peak, a small peak of FSH at the start of your cycle actually induces the development of follicles. And when it is time for ovulation, LH will peak, and LH is secreted again by your gonadotropes to induce ovulation. And at the same time, the ovulated follicle will convert into your corpus luteum, as shown here. That is also due to the effect of your luteinizing hormone. So how are your gonadotropes regulated? How is their secretion regulated? So for example, here you have day length as a stimulatory factor because, for example, you have your goats which are short day breeders, so they prefer yung mga araws or days na mga madilim-dilim. Or in contrast, you have your horses which are long day breeders, so they require mga summer months, mga longer sunny days for their S2 cycle to start or to initiate. So that is a factor. So for example, day length, let's say a goat, short day breeder, nagiging shorter na yung day length. So it stimulates their hypothalamus to secrete gonadotropin releasing hormone, or your GnRH. So again, this GnRH is secreted to our hypophyseal portal system to act on gonadotropes on the adenohypophysis. So these gonadotropes will secrete your gonadotropins, your LH and your FSH. And these gonadotropins will be secreted to the circulation to find their target cells. So primarily, your FSH will act on mga follicular cells on the ovary, again, to stimulate follicular development. And your LH, when the time comes, will induce ovulation and conversion of the ovulated follicle into your corpus luteum. So the end goal actually of these gonadotropins are enabled or facilitated by the estrogen and your progesterone. So progesterone is your pregnancy hormone. So of course, in the mammary gland, it will increase ductal growth and alveolar cell development, of course, to prepare for lactation after pregnancy. And in uterus, of course, because progesterone is a pregnancy hormone, so it needs to prepare the uterus, the uterine lining, for implantation of the fetus or of the zygote rather. And sa mga young mammals naman, estrogen, young females, estrogen naman would actually induce the arising of the secondary sexual characteristics. So primarily your muscles sa males or wattles, for example, in male animals, or female characteristics rather in female animals. So of course, as we will definitely go back to this figure and how these play in the female reproductive cycle when we go to the reproduction part of our course later this semester. But for now, I want you to learn, or I want you to acknowledge or realize that GnRH from the hypothalamus as stimulated by daylight, for example, is the triggering point for the gonadotropes to release the gonadotropes or LH and FSH for them to enable their actions in the reproductive tract or in the reproductive system. Primarily FSH for follicular development in the ovary, and LH to convert the ovulated follicle into the corpus luteum, which secretes your estrogen and which secretes your progesterone rather, and estrogen along the way to enable such effects as previously discussed. So now let's go to the hormones that are secreted by your pars intermedia or your middle pituitary as shown here. So they actually secrete your melanocyte stimulating hormone, beta endorphins and enkephalins. So beta endorphins and enkephalins, these are important in pain management of the animal. But endocrinologically, what is of importance to us is the melanocyte stimulating hormone. So these are important in lower vertebrates. For example, yung fish, reptiles, and amphibians because they have melanophore cells which contain melanin granules. So what happens here? So when the animal na-detect niya na ang background is dark, it releases MSH, which acts on your melanophores, causing the animal's skin to become darker. And on contrast naman, when the animal, the retina of the animal detects now medyo lighter or white yung background, MSH secretion is ceased and the skin will become lighter. Hence, MSH has a role in animals trying to camouflage themselves or in environmental mimicry. Now, let's go to the hormones that are secreted by your neurohypophysis or your posterior pituitary gland. First of which is your oxytocin. So it's secreted by the nucleus of your nerves of your paraventricular nucleus. So it affects your myometrium or your smooth muscles of your uterus to increase the strength of contraction during parturition. So as shown here, yung color blue. Also, the stretching of the cervix provides a positive feedback to increase the secretion of oxytocin, again increasing the strength of myometrial contraction during parturition. Aside from that, it also has a role in milk flow. So the suckling reflex of the calf that is sensed by the other receptors sends a feedback to the brain, right, that is sensed by your PVN, again your paraventricular nucleus, which enables them to send signal to the posterior pituitary to increase the secretion of your oxytocin. So oxytocin finds its way to the mammary gland and of course allows for milk flow. So yun yung dual purpose, two of the major roles of oxytocin in reproduction. So it increases myometrial contraction and it allows for milk flow in mammals. Second, hormone of your neurohypophysis or posterior pituitary is your vasopressin. So vasopressin is otherwise known as your antidiuretic hormone. So it is secreted by your supraoptic nucleus. So they help to regulate water permeability of the distal tubules of the collecting ducts of your nephron or yung parts of the functional unit of your kidney. So what happens here? As the name implies, antidiuretic hormone. So hindi kanya papaihiin. So when there is low ADH level, so diluted urine is voided. So walang antidiuretic effect. So ihi ka lang ng ihi. So your ihi is diluted. Whereas if mataas yung level ng ADH, antidiuretic hormone, so antidiuretic effect is heightened, so yung urine na nabo-void mo is concentrated because the body is trying to conserve water. So that what basically is the trigger point on the release of antidiuretic hormone pag mababa ang blood volume or mga water content of the body. So the primary role here is to regulate extracellular fluid osmolarity. So I hope you learned in this perhaps very long video lecture, which is for 2 weeks of your lessons. So yeah, I do hope that you will be able to read and take notes from the references I gave you. And if you have any questions, please type lang doon, please comment down or post doon sa ating Facebook group for me to address it. And if there is other concerns that you may want to raise, kindly post lang doon. Do not worry. And I hope you are staying safe, staying healthy, and have a good day. Thank you very much for your attention.